Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. My name is Nabaggala Lilian Maximillian, and I am joining this conversation as a movement artist, choreographer, researcher, and cultural activist based in Kampala, Uganda. Before we start, I would like to take this opportunity to honor my late dad and my late uncle who just passed away, and the burial is today as I'm recording this. May his soul rest in eternal peace. He has been a father figure to me, and I beg that we honor him by taking a moment of silence. Thank you very much. So moving forward, for me, dance has been more than a performance. It is a language, it is an archive, and it is a political tool for me. My body and the bodies that I work with carry memories of joy, hope, struggle, and as we work together, I believe that this is what we call cultural democracy, digitality, and intergenerational cooperation. I am speaking this through lived experience and also as theory. Culture in the crossfire. As authoritarianism and nationalism rise, culture is placed in a crossfire. We are living in a world where there's an increase of frames of opposites, where there's us and them. This has defined the politics, the migration, and our day-to-day lifestyle. But for me, culture is not a weapon. Culture is a bridge. It is a bridge through which I use my body and movement, and I have found ways to cross that bridge. How? Through dance, I create spaces where different voices, generations, traditions of art are seen, heard, and can be felt equally. Whenever I'm creating my works, there's an integration of traditional dance elements and contemporary dance elements. And the scope of the works, from music to the movement to the languages used, is a marriage of these two. And for me, that is what I call cultural democracy in my art of movement. Moving to the next point, which is cultural democracy through dance. Cultural democracy through dance. In my craft, I grew up moving from street dancing or contemporary dancing, most especially break dancing, hip hop, and working, and then to traditional dances. So I kept on moving back and forth with the two of them, and I learned them in the same period of time, so they kind of coexisted. I fell in love with traditional dance elements, but I was a contemporary dancer, and so there was this space where I could not really fit in because I'm not from Europe, so I will not do hip hop or breakdancing the way that the Europeans or Americans or people from the Western world would do it. But every time I did traditional dances, I felt like, yeah, this is who I was, but still I wasn't my ancestors. So me going back and forth helped me and taught me that democracy is not just about who speaks, but also about who moves, who is seen, and whose rhythm is allowed to count. That is why, as Batalo East, we derived the name from battles, which is a very Eurocentric and a Western way of dancing, where two people come together and they battle it out by seeing who wins best with the movements that they do, and also Lutalo, which is war. So Batalo, Lutalo, Battles and Lotalo come together, and then we created Batalo, which strikes a balance between the two. A Luganda word and an English word. That is already democracy coming together. And we realize that there's always this space of an inner turmoil and an inner war that every individual goes through when they're seeking for their identity, and creating a space for them where the two can coexist, where contemporary and hip-hop and street dances can coexist with traditional, created a space where these youth can actually pick an identity and decide who they want to be as a youth of today. And so we have created that balance in not only the equation dance workshops that we have, but also on the East African scale, hence Batalo East, and the global landscape. So for me, that balance is cultural democracy moving into practice. My works like Nambi the African Shield Maidens carries oral traditional stories from queens to mothers to warrior princesses, and the woman of today. And all these are brought into dance theater and then later derived into film. So every time I restage this work, I am reminded of democracy not being about parliaments and politics, but rather democracy taking space in stages, on stages, classrooms, rehearsal rooms, to mention but a few, where different generations come together to tell their stories. When we move to the point of digitality, of course, in today's world, democracy happens online. Digitality has become both a bridge but also a battlefield. Take a wild look at YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok, and all the content that is being consumed. It either bridges or creates a turmoil within individuals, with individuals, and amongst individuals. But the advantage to this was when the faded film which addresses colorism and bleaching, was released on social media. It reached to so many audiences that were far beyond Kampala and Uganda. And that was humbling because it got into new spaces that I would have never physically have gone into. Nambi, the film Ascension that was released during COVID, also reached out to so many platforms and so many individuals, which sparked a conversation of how do we see the comparison or the significance of historical women from the heritage and the woman of today, and how do these relate to each other? How are we still the same even if we do not inherit the crown by birth, right? But how do we as individuals still hold that strength in our calm dignity and contribute to our communities? Where I would think digitality comes with risks is there's misinformation, exclusion of those without access, and also the flattening of complex cultures into content. Case in point is traditional dances in Uganda, and I believe in all over the world, but now I'm going to talk about Uganda. All our traditional dances have a meaning behind them. They hold a story. Every movement says something. But on social media, without context on these social media platforms, there's misinterpretation of the movements through the cultural lens. So I feel like as artists, we must use digital tools not only to give visibility, but also as a dialogue to make them spaces for exchange and not just consumption. Intergenerational cooperation. Intergenerational cooperation. Now that is where I really come from, because in my works within my works and the work processes and rehearsals, elders hold the knowledge of traditional dances. They hold the knowledge of our heritage and cultures, and the fact that in Uganda most of our traditions are going extinct due to the modernity that's coming into the world and the use of computers, this has been phased out. So intergenerational cooperation is very, very crucial in these times. And there needs to be a dialogue, because the youth bring in innovation, energy, digital fluency, and the older generation brings in the historical foundation of where we come from. And when these two come together, something very powerful happens. So in my work process, I realized that I needed to engage with mentors from the older generation, case in point, traditional teachers, who I call to have a look at my works in progress and see how best traditional dances I have incorporated within the storyline can interpret or can really represent where I come from without necessarily diluting them, but also having them layer with the contemporary dances to create an identity as Nabaggala, and not try to lose myself into a Western world or Eurocentric way of creation, but rather as a youth who understands that tradition is important for me to integrate within my works, but also without losing the fact that I also have a contemporary and modern dance background. So at Potalo East, young dancers sit with traditional teachers during the equation dance workshops, traditional teachers, percussionists, and a dialogue happens through movement, through rhythm, and through the drummings. Of course, there are arguments, and each and every one of either side has knowledge, but the beauty with this is, as the drummers and percussionists start playing the drums to the rhythm of the tradition, the contemporary and street dancers always find a way of marching onto this rhythm, and that creates a perfect unison of new forms of belonging that are not defined by anything else, but rather a session of democracy taking place. In Nambi, the African Shield Maidens, in Ugandan communities, so many women embody a quiet leadership, and wisdom sits in their hearts. And when I was creating this work, I ensured that I did research from women of all levels of life, starting from a lady who was selling food in the market to the contemporary corporate woman. And for me, this knowledge I brought on two female dancers who also shared their perspective of how they felt as queens of today, and how that reflected with the warrior queens and historical queens. This cooperation and collaboration of all these different types of women was intergenerational cooperation in practice. Activism in action. As an activist, for me, every work is activism. And I have slowly got to realize that works like Faded, that was derived from a personal story of my sister who's of a darker complexion than I. And as I did more research, I realized that beauty needs to be challenged. What are the beauty standards? And this really opened up difficult conversations about self-worth and what is colorism, And what is black, what is white, what is caramel, what is all that? And does that define who we are? And does that define the standards of beauty that are in society? Chaotic Addiction is a work that dealt with mental health, addiction, and resilience topics, which are often silenced in society, and people are stigmatized when they say they have a mental health problem or they're seeing a psychiatrist. So I felt the need that as an artist to come in and say something about it and create a work that sparks conversation, that triggers people to actually go inward and then bring up something that needs to be talked about as society, and to make it also okay to be talked about. Bondage was about trauma bondage, how we have traumas and how we marinate these traumas by making them look like they are our traits, but in actual sense they aren't. And these are things that need to be talked about, because we have generational traumas, we have ambiguous traumas, but all these are usually overlooked, because once one talks about a trauma that they've had in their childhood, then they are stigmatized as someone who has a mental problem. Nambi reclaimed histories of African women often erased by colonial narratives and patriarchy. These works were not just staged in theaters. They become conversations often, interventions, and spaces for communities to recognize themselves. That is why activism of culture is not abstract, but embodied in lived and collective experiences. Moving forward on the pathways. So how do we nurture cultural democracy in a digital fluid world? As Nabaggala Lilian, I believe that it's important, first of all, to empower artists as mediators between the tradition and innovation, because when a creative is put in a space where mediation is needed, they will find various ways that will unite people together to create a common ground and create an understanding of a certain topic or a certain need that needs to be collectively done, or that requires different groups of people to come together. The use of digital tools for not just visibility and content creation, of course, but to find co-creation and archiving. For example, at Brotalo East, we have looked for tribes that are going extinct, and we have been archiving them and recording them and posting small videos of these cultures on TikTok, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, so that they can be known by the youth of today who actually may not know that these tribes exist. For example, the Banyuli tribe, which is very rich in culture, but because it was going extinct, we felt there was a need for us to go and archive their history, but also create space for their youth to meet elders so that they get to learn about their culture and not just overlook it or brush it off. Prioritize intergenerational spaces, something like that I've talked about, such as Kuhamahama, where we get elders to meet, where we get the youth to meet elders, and they get to understand about the history of their region and the history of their tribes. To resist nationalist silos through cross-border collaborations. Earlier on last year, I recreated Faded, the piece about colorism and identity and the standards of beauty, with different females from representing different East African countries. So I had a Tanzanian, I had a Congolese, I had a Rwandese, I had a Kenyan, and I had a Ugandan. And we came together and put our minds together, did research remotely on what is in our community and why standards of beauty based off who's lighter, who's darker, and how can we bring our brains together to speak about these things in our communities. And I'm very grateful that at the Ubuntu Festival we were able to showcase this work. So I really encourage that cross-border collaborations should be created more often, because then this will eliminate the nationalist silos. Recognize the body as knowledge. Movement itself is a living archive for the future. As artists, as a movement artist, as a dancer and choreographer, our bodies emulate the emotions, they emulate what cannot be spoken but is felt. And for me, as an artist, it's very important that if someone can feel something, then they can move it without necessarily saying it. So, recognition of body as knowledge. Thank you very much. And I would want to leave a note before I close this panel, that culture is not a battlefield, it is a bridge. I have evidenced it. And through movement, through democracy, through digitality, and through intergenerational cooperation, we can build futures that honor both heritage and innovation. Thank you very much. My name is Nabaggala and remains Nabaggala Lilian Maximillian, and I'm very humbled to be part of this panel. Thank you.